What's the main thrust of the immunology work that you're doing at DPUK?
Well, what we want to study is the role that inflammation may play in the onset and the progression of common dementias. So we're studying Alzheimer's disease and we're studying Lewy body dementia. And we know that inflammation is important in these diseases, but we think it might happen at an early stage and it may actually drive disease progression. So what we want to do is to measure markers in the blood and in the spinal fluid to see if we can identify particular changes that are characteristic of these different dementias, and that can predict how people change over time. Because ultimately what we want to do is to see if we can find ways of intervening. If we find that inflammation is important and we can identify changes, that we can find drugs and other ways of reducing the inflammation to see if we can improve outcomes and modify the actual disease process.
What are the main areas that the studies are focusing on?
So there are three main areas. One is looking at genetic changes in people, in populations, through the Dementias portal within DPUK, which is looking at whether genes can predict the extent to which people both develop dementia and change over time. The second phase, which is called the imprint study, is looking at blood changes and changes in spinal fluid. So we're recruiting participants with Alzheimer's disease and Lewy body dementia at an early stage, even at the mild cognitive impairment stage, to see if we can identify changes. And then the third will be the impact study, which will look at brain imaging changes using PET scanning, so that's looking directly at changes in the brain to see if we can show particular changes in inflammation there in these diseases.
Now, industry plays an important part in all of this as well. How are they particularly helping? Because it's an unusual thing to get quite such a high level of collaboration.
Our industry partnership is incredibly important, particularly in this area, because industry has a big interest in inflammation, not just in dementias and degenerative disease, but also in other disorders, things like arthritis, rheumatoid arthritis. So they already have significant programs looking at anti-inflammatory drugs, and so it may be that some of these agents can be developed or may be altered or repurposed for use in dementias like Alzheimer's disease and Lewy body dementia. So they also have a very big interest in inflammation in the brain.
Now, this is work that's being led in Cambridge, but not exclusively. You have partners at Cardiff and at Imperial as well.
That's right. So the genetic work is led from Cardiff by a colleague, Valentina Eschot-Price, and the clinical studies are partnerships between Imperial College London with Paresh Malhotra and Paul Matthews and our group here in Cambridge.
What do you hope we will ultimately be able to achieve with the sort of outcomes and insights that will come from this project work?
Well, what we want to achieve is to find out the extent to which inflammation is important as a driver of disease, and whether we can identify that through particular changes or immune signatures that might be different between Alzheimer's disease and Lewy body dementia. If we can do that, we can then start to identify people with high levels of inflammation who might be most at risk of the disease progressing, and also might benefit most from measures to reduce inflammation, although of course they'd need to be shown through future clinical trials.